What is going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another video with me, your bald-headed boy Scribe. How are we all doing? Are we all settling into the new year? I do certainly hope so. So, Batuu. Why is it important? Why am I telling you about Batuu? Well, it kind of has to do with the fact that the Stranger's Conquest is finishing in about a day. How does that make sense? It doesn't really, but let's have a chat about it, shall we? Alrighty then. So, those of you that are paying attention within Galaxy of Heroes know that the Conquest for the Stranger is going to finish in 1 day, and as of the time of this recording, 3 hours. Why is that significant? Well, when a Conquest finishes, there is a 2-week break before we get a new Conquest. Typically speaking, the assets for the next Conquest are loaded in a week prior to that, which would be Tuesday. Essentially, when this Conquest ends on Tuesday, they need to load in the assets for us to get Inquisitor Barriss and then later Darth Vader Duel's End within the game. At that time, they usually have to prep the next Conquest set. So typically speaking, when that happens, we usually get the kit reveal for the next Conquest unit. And Conquest units oftentimes sit separate from errors, but sometimes also have significance on errors. Sometimes it ties in, other times it don't, right? We can look at characters like Smee, made sense, was a pirate, tied into Era of Piracy. We had Maz Kanata, makes sense, tied into the Era of the Piracy. This one, for some reason we got the Stranger, doesn't tie into anything, doesn't really make sense. We just kind of had him. So sometimes it ties in, sometimes it does not. However, there is some interesting information that was data mined a couple of weeks back, and I want to draw our attention to it because I think it gives us an indicator of where we are going next. Batuu, and why it's significant. The image that you are seeing here in the background right now is a skyline of the planet of Batuu, and these are all the famous spires from the planet of Batuu. Now, this was data mined a couple of weeks back, like I said, within the SWGOH events Discord server. They do all of the highly reliable data mines. This one is a background image for an era, basically, like we've had the era of the anniversary or the piracy era and all that sort of good business. They have these images that they use as splash screens on the backgrounds of stuff. Now, you could throw this image into a Google image search and it will tell you that is the planet of Batuu. But it's a little bit easier than that because if you download the actual image file, you'll see that it is named Batuu as part of the saved image file. So it's definitely the planet of Batuu. Now, there are a couple of things that took place on the planet of Batuu that have some significance within Star Wars in general, right? First of all, if you've ever been to Galaxy's Edge, I haven't, I want to, but it's like the other side of the planet for me, so it's a bit difficult for me to get there. Essentially, Hondo is running some smuggling missions on board the Millennium Falcon there for the Resistance, sort of after, I want to say after the destruction of Starkiller Base, sort of between The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, that sort of era. It'd be kind of cool if we actually get another Millennium Falcon piloted by Hondo. That would be quite ironic and funny, I think, and a lifter for the Resistance fleet. I don't necessarily think we'll get that. That's just part of the ride experience when you go to Galaxy's Edge. Everybody gets to interact on the Millennium Falcon and stuff like that. It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. I'd like to see it one day. But anyway, on the planet of Batuu, it is primarily a sort of safe haven for smugglers and criminals and this sort of thing on the edges of the outer rim, basically near the unknown regions, basically. But later on, there is a book set here called The Black Spire. And that's set sort of, like I said, the end of the Force Awakens, between the Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, where Resistance are being hounded by the First Order, essentially. They're being tracked. I've not read the book, I've just seen a brief synopsis of it. But more importantly, there is another key character who has significance, in my opinion, for the upcoming new content that we are getting within Star Wars franchise in general. There is a book by Timothy Zahn called Thrawn Alliances, okay? And this book is still a canon book within the Star Wars universe. It is a canon novel by Timothy Zahn, the guy who's accredited as sort of a driving force behind the Thrawn character in general. And we know that Thrawn is a primary focus going forward, at least for the short term, for Star Wars media. We think it's probably going to develop into stuff like Abeloth, but for now, Thrawn is kind of the big bad in the most recent set stuff. I don't know if he's going to be a villain within Mandalorian Grogu. I don't think so, but you don't know. We just know after Season 1 of Ahsoka, he has escaped his exile on Peridea and is back within the, within the Outer Rim, escaped the unknown regions, right? And this book takes a really interesting take, because essentially Thrawn is working with Anakin Skywalker in one of them and with Darth Vader in the other. They're essentially the same person, right? They are the same person, kind of. Depends how you really want to define the personalities of Darth Vader and Jedi Anakin. But essentially he goes to the same planet at different times, right? One is when he is going with Darth Vader, investigate a disturbance on the Force on the planet of Batuu, which lies in the Outer Rim territories on the edge of the unknown regions. And in the second storyline, Anakin Skywalker travels to Batuu after Padme goes there on a mission, and he is going there hunting her. Meets up with Thrawn, and they go on a mission together to try and find her. So why do I feel like this is important? One, this is probably the most significant canon event that relates to what's coming up next. I still feel like we are going to get a GL Thrawn, or a new legendary Thrawn, probably a GL Thrawn. Mostly because if we go to the Imperial Remnant faction over here, which would be more up to date with the current status of Star Wars media, Imperial Remnant, if you look at the last releases that we had for Captain Enoch, and we had the Death Trooper Peridia and Night Trooper, that trio, they were released together. Enoch was supposed to be the leadership for them, but they don't really have a proper place. They felt like they were placeholder units until we got a GL Thrawn into the game. So the reason I feel like Batuu is significant is because it has heavy ties to Thrawn across two different timelines. CG has shown that they can throw out units that are a little bit random and disjointed in terms of connectivity, in terms of timelines as well. With the previous era where we had like the Rogue One and the B-Wing, and then we had Zuckuss and Forlom, and then the Stranger. It was kind of a weird setup, right? So I do feel like that little hint to Thrawn could mean that they are gearing up focus on Thrawn. The other part that I do think is interesting is because of the Resistance and First Order tie-in. December 2025 was the 10-year anniversary of The Force Awakens. There is a novel called The Black Spire set on Batuu, which takes place at the end of The Force Awakens, which focuses on a battle between the Resistance and the First Order. So I'm wondering if those two things can tie together. Do we get an era focused on Batuu where we could get things that would celebrate the Force Awakens and lead us into a GL for Thrawn sometime next year, well, this year rather, at the end of the next era? Could we see lifter units for Resistance like Snoke come to the game, maybe as a leader for unused First Order units? So we could go ahead and see First Order, for example. We could see, could Snoke be a leader for Phasma, for the pilots for First Order Executioner? Could we see the First Order Riot Trooper who faces off against Finn? I think it's got the nickname of Nines, it's FN199 or something like that. The one that faces off against Finn on Takodana, beats him when he's using the lightsaber. Could we see that? Could we actually get a lightsaber Finn? Could either of these units lead to a legendary unlock of either Snoke or General Leia? Both of those would be very interesting units to have. That would kind of touch on a celebration of The Force Awakens, also touch on leading into GL Thrawn content, tied together, all with a nice bow, by the significance of Batuu, because they all have ties there to Batuu, right? So do I see us getting lifter units potentially for Padme's team? I hope so. I really hope so. Do we get units like Bail Organa? Do we get Captain Typho? I would love to see that sort of focus draw through. And I think all of this will come in the next 2 eras necessarily. Maybe it might have to go into 3, but I firmly believe that the end of the year is probably going to be focused on Rogue One and Andor Season 2, because December next year, or this year rather, is going to be a 10-year anniversary for the Rogue One film. So it would make sense if that's where things move towards the end of the year. But I do firmly believe this year is going to be focused on Thrawn, leading up to the Mandalorian and Grogu film in May, tying together. Maybe we get a new raid by the end of the year. I'm not entirely sure on that, but it all seems to kind of make sense. That's the only thing that really makes sense to me that this background represents. Some lifter units potentially for First Order, maybe leading into a legendary release either of Leia Organa for General Leia in the Force Awakens, or Snoke, which I would love. I'd love to have Snoke either be leading unused First Order units alongside stuff like Riot Trooper, maybe Flame Trooper as well, First Order Flame Trooper, or potentially having Snoke as a lifter for C. because there is some tertiary lineup there, and let's be honest, Bane doesn't really lift C, just kind of helps C, and is more widely used on his own. Now, I know I might be, drinking too much Jawa juice here and just making stuff up, but I was just thinking about it. I saw that image weeks ago, and I was like, just couldn't wrap my head around why it would be like this. So I'm thinking that when, in a couple of days' time, we get a Conquest unit, if it has any relation to either Thrawn, or it has any relation to First Order / Resistance, I feel like that would be a real telling sign for where we're going to go in the future eras for the first half, at least, of 2026. And I think it would be a decent way to go. Don't get me wrong, I don't think people will be super, super energized about it unless they absolutely knew where it was leading, and they knew it was leading to something cool, like a new GL Thrawn, potentially. Because, after this era of the anniversary, people were kind of at a low level of inspiration, particularly with the way the game is set up and the splitting of, era units and legacy units. And then, of course, the confusion around the era leveling system. And before that, we had pirates. Not many people were engaged in pirates. I think that CG could do with a big win and something that was really exciting. So fingers crossed for that. But how about you guys let me know? Do you think I'm just drinking too much Jawa juice? Have I been engaging in too much deathstick activities? Or do you think there is a grain of truth here? I do think the next era will be on Batuu, and I do think it will focus on those units. Well, maybe not those units in particular, but I think that there will be something that leads towards GL Thrawn. I think he will then lift up things like, potentially Enoch, Death Trooper Peridia, Night Trooper, and then we could have maybe Pelion come to the game, maybe Rook as his personal assassin. I'm not sure. There are ways and means that CG can go down this route. I'm intrigued. I'm interested. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Make sure you like the video before you go, and I'll see you all in the very next video. Peace out, and may the Force be with you.